They told me this was for my own good. But all I heard that morning was farewell. My name is Beulah Ellis, 74. The day began wrapped in autumn's colors, the town itself draped in gold like a worn shawl. Sunlight slipped down the shop windows and across the hood of Daniel's SUV, while maple leaves spun slowly in the air before landing on the glass, as though the season wanted to stall my leaving. The air was thick with wood smoke and bruised apples, a scent that stirred my hands with memories of harvests past. Daniel kept his gaze fixed on the road, repeating in his measured way that this was the safer choice. He has always lived by order, clean shirts, sharp plans, and the belief that checklists could steady even a trembling heart. His voice was careful, the sort of tone you use for a frightened animal. In the back seat, Laura's eyes stayed glued to her phone, tapping through emails. Her lips were pressed into a line, her mind already in the meeting she would slip into the moment she found Wi-Fi. She reminded me the facility had excellent reviews, promised I would find friends, and pointed out that my house was full of stairs. And stairs are statistics, she said flatly. Beside me sat Mark, silent, a man forever in the middle, the buffer child who drifts between tempests. When our eyes met in the rearview mirror, he dropped his gaze and muttered that we should look on the bright side. Maple Grove appeared at the end of a long drive, framed by fiery red trees. The brick walls glowed like fading embers. A fountain in the courtyard whispered softly, its pools scattered with fallen leaves drifting like tiny boats that had no destination. Inside, the floor gleamed, carrying the faint scent of lemon polish. A television in the corner murmured news in a voice meant to soothe. A meal cart rattled past, carrying oatmeal and cinnamon, and hunger brushed against grief inside my chest. Daniel approached the receptionist with the ease of someone who organizes everything. He mentioned he had filled out all the forms since I get easily overwhelmed. Laura checked her watch, urging everyone to be quick, efficient. I nodded as though in agreement, though in my mind another world replayed itself. A kitchen 30 years ago when my hands moved swiftly, when the table was alive with noise. A roast ticking in the oven, Motown humming low from the radio, the boys drumming on plates with their forks until their father stilled them with his mock sternness. We never ate in a rush. Laura beamed about her spelling bee ribbon, Mark bartered green beans for rolls, Daniel carefully counted the bread to keep it fair down to the crumb. That cramped dining room somehow held everything. Our laughter, our sore feet, the stories of scraped knees, the promises tossed like paper boats that always found the other side. I still feel the wave of heat when I open the oven door. Still remember the pride of lifting a pie and saying it had set. Back in the office, the ticking clock rang louder than any bell. The director smiled as she described the schedule. Therapy activities, days organized neatly around cheerful words. I listened, but I also heard something else, the sound of a zipper pulling slowly shut. Daniel explained that I lose track of time, that I repeat myself. His voice was soft, like a man reading a headline he didn't want to see in print. His eyes searched mine as though hoping I could undo his words by sheer will. Laura slid the papers toward me, telling me I should sign now, that it would make things easier. She used words like proactive. She promised she would visit after work, maybe later this week. Mark laid his hand on my elbow, saying this was temporary, just until everything was settled, that my safety came first. He spoke as though reciting a script written for him. I looked at each of them and asked the question none of them seemed to have considered. Had anyone asked me what I wanted? The director laced her fingers together and said, "Everyone wants the same thing, to feel safe." Daniel told me I'd be grateful one day. We walked down the corridor toward my new room. The door was slightly open, hanging there like it had something to confess. From one doorway came the sharp rhythm of knitting needles, from another a cough that snapped like a branch. My room was tidy, waiting for me. The bed was made, the curtains pulled wide to a strip of sky. On the table, 3 sunflowers leaned toward the window, and on the chair lay a folded quilt. Still too light to know how heavy promises can be. Daniel set my suitcase down and pointed out the call button again. He reminded me that moving would be easier if I didn't insist on bringing more of the house with me. He said the house had to be emptied before the month was over. Laura placed a framed family photo on the dresser, and nudged it twice to straighten it. She mentioned I'd be closer to town now, that visits would be simpler. She added that the staff was trained. a phrase you use when you'd rather not mention kindness. Mark draped my sweater over the chair and stared at the quilt stitching. He promised to tend the garden, that my peonies would bloom without missing a season. He promised he'd call that night. I tried this new life on the way you slip into shoes at the store, walking slow circles to find where they pinch. My hand trailed along the wall. I listened to the hum of carts rolling and the softer sighs that drifted in a place where days all line up the same. They hugged me like people rushing for the door. Daniel's arms were short and certain. Laura held her phone as much as me. Mark lingered, then released me. I watched them leave down the hall. 3 shadows that once clung to my skirt, and now clung to their schedules. I sat on the bed, breathing slow, waiting for the door to click shut. My mind filled with Sunday gravy's scent, the scrape of forks against thick plates, the record that skipped on the same note every time. I thought of boys becoming men while I stood rinsing dishes. A nurse with tired kindness in her eyes guided me to lunch. She told me the soup was chicken, the rolls served warm. I smiled, thanked her, and kept my heavier thoughts to myself. Some things you hold close because they're the only steady warmth you have left. Some things you don't say until the room is strong enough to hear them. The day they brought me here, I heard their goodbyes, and also the faint click of another door opening somewhere far off. A week later, the phone rang in my room, carrying a voice from the past. The lawyer's words were careful, but they spilled out bright and sharp. My sister in California had died, leaving me $6.8 million. I sat very still, my thumb brushing the chair's armrest, letting the number take root like a seed testing the soil. That same afternoon, I asked the front desk about the computer in the library. The old machine was slow but steady. I searched property filings and corporate records for Maple Grove and its parent company. I filled a spiral notebook with names, dates, addresses, and folded it under a pile of crossword puzzles. I found that the company owned 3 facilities in Oregon, all tied to loans that left them fragile. At night, I called the attorney back. I asked how a purchase could be made quietly. We spoke of trusts, shell companies, and ways to keep my name invisible until the time was right. His tone sharpened when he realized I wasn't simply a lonely old woman with idle questions, but a client with resources and intent. The days passed with their slow cadence. Mrs. Powell, who had once taught literature, kept a stack of old essays by her chair. She would read a line or two aloud, then stare ahead as if a chalkboard might return if she only waited long enough. Across the hall, Mr. Harland, once a sailor, filled the air with sea stories, his hands drawing waves, storms, and diesel air that never touched the ground. I listened more than I spoke. I kept quiet notes, the frayed carpets, the lights that flickered, the chairs in the lounge that sighed under their tired stuffing. I noticed which aides stayed after hours, and which vanished the instant the clock released them. Would you like me to rewrite this again in a shorter, sharper style, like a suspense story, or keep this gentle literary tone but expand it even further? I kept track of how many residents had family who visited more than once a month, and the list was far too short. One Sunday, I stood at the edge of the courtyard and watched a family gather beneath a maple tree. A little boy darted after drifting leaves while his grandmother clutched his jacket like an anchor. His parents poured steaming coffee from a thermos and passed around muffins that looked freshly baked. Their laughter rose into the air, light and unburdened. In that sound, I felt the weight of the silence that waited in my own room. That was when the idea rooted itself in me, solid and immovable. Within weeks, the trust had finalized the purchase of Maple Grove and its 2 sister homes. The morning I walked the halls knowing the deed was effectively mine, I felt the ground differently beneath my steps. My first signature authorized new lighting, durable carpets, and chairs built with comfort in mind. The next brought fresh paint in colors that looked more like sunrise than sunset. The kitchen received modern equipment and funds for produce from local farms. The activity room got its piano tuned for the first time in years. Out in the garden, I had benches placed beneath the trees and raised beds prepared for vegetables. Then I wrote a new rule. Every resident was entitled to see their family at least once a week. Families unable to commit to that rhythm would have their visits limited to weekends. A measure not meant as punishment, but as protection for moments that truly mattered. Signing that policy, the pen seemed to carry more weight than metal could. My name never appeared on memos, and I kept out of the staff meetings. Yet the changes spread quietly, like tides pulled by a hidden moon. At night, I would walk the corridors and hear softer laughter, breathe in the smell of richer coffee, and sense the hum of a home coming alive again. In my reflection, I looked unchanged, but under my skin was a steadiness I had not felt since the house had been mine and my children were young. I was no longer just another resident. I was the keeper of this place. And I wasn't finished. The first challenge came with a call from Daniel. The receptionist told me his voice was low and clipped, every word sharp as though he were reciting charges in court. He demanded to know who dared limit his right to see his own mother. The next day, Laura's email landed, 3 paragraphs of corporate indignation, accusing the facility of overstepping its authority. Mark didn't send anything, but when I passed him in the hall, his clenched jaw said more than words. 3 days later, the administrator summoned me. The children had requested a formal meeting. The conference room gleamed with tall windows, a polished table, and leather chairs. On one wall hung Maple Grove's mission statement, on the other a strategy chart. A pot of coffee steamed quietly in the corner, its aroma thick in the stillness. Daniel arrived first, suit and tie knotted as he had worn them since college interviews. He placed his briefcase on the table as though it held evidence. Laura walked in next, blazer over travel clothes, thumbs tapping on her phone until she finally looked up and saw me. Mark slipped in last, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes restless. The administrator began explaining the new visiting policy, her voice cautious. Daniel cut her off, calling it an assault on family rights. Laura pressed harder, asking who had the authority to decide when she could see her mother. Mark kept quiet, but his foot tapped against the floor. I let them speak. Then I entered the room. The air shifted immediately. The administrator stepped aside. Daniel's words froze. Laura's phone sank into her lap. Mark's gaze fixed on me at last. I took the seat at the head of the table and set down a folder. Calmly, I told them the decision was mine. I was the chairwoman of Maple Grove. A heavy silence followed, thick with disbelief. Daniel's brow knitted as he tried to reconcile what I'd said with what he thought he knew. Laura's narrowed eyes searched for the blind spot she had missed. Mark's shoulders eased just barely. I explained that the rules weren't meant to punish, but to safeguard the time we still had. That this place was mine now, and the people in it deserved more than occasional holiday visits. Daniel leaned back, jaw shifting but silent. Laura blinked slowly once. Mark's hands emerged from his pockets and settled on the table. When no one answered, I closed the folder, rose and walked out. In the hallway, residents had gathered in small clusters, their eyes alight with something unspoken. As I passed, a gentle applause began. It grew steady and strong, until it filled the corridor behind me. At first, the visits came because they were required. Daniel appeared every Sunday, setting a bakery pie on the table like a stamp of proof. Laura rearranged her travel so she could drop by twice a week, her voice softening as the minutes passed. Mark showed up every Tuesday evening, quiet but unwavering. As weeks blurred into months, duty gave way to something warmer. Daniel stayed long enough to help serve dinner in the hall. Laura began bringing flowers for the lounge and joining trivia nights. Mark lingered after dark, sometimes walking me to the garden just to hear the crickets. They stopped checking clocks. Conversations wandered. Laughter returned to the corners of the room. One Tuesday after the others had gone, Mark asked if we could sit by the fish tank. The glow painted his face in gold. He admitted he had stayed silent during the argument because his marriage was unraveling, and he feared if he fought too hard for me, he'd lose the only thing he thought he had left. He couldn't bear losing everything the way he believed I had. His words lay between us like a truth spoken too late, but still worth knowing. I had thought their absence was indifference. Now I understood how fear could paralyze just as deeply. It didn't erase the hurt, but it shifted something inside me. That summer, the 4 of us found ourselves together in the garden. The air was warm, heavy with rosemary. Daniel poured lemonade into glasses while Laura laid out peach pie. Mark sat beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. We laughed over an old story, and the sound felt whole. The setting sun painted their faces in amber light, and I thought of how the past cannot be changed. It stays fixed where it is. But what we do with what remains is ours to decide. and I chose love for whatever time was left. Would you like me to make this rewrite more emotional and cinematic, almost like a short film narration? Or keep it closer to a grounded novel style?